I'm so happy to be coming on after Cameron, because Cameron just really hit it on the nose with all the things that you can do with Domo and with apps and Domo Actions especially, which you do create Domo Actions within the Connector IDE, which is what I have the opportunity to go over with you all today. So let's get connected with Domo's Connector IDE. You might be wondering, what is the Connector IDE and why would I need to use it? Especially since Domo already has thousands of connectors, why not just use one of those? So there are some situations where we don't have a connector built out yet. And so if you want to connect to that third party, you can go ahead and build your own connector. Or what about if you have your own internal APIs that aren't publicly available, but you are able to authenticate into them and pull your company's data? We also allow for that as well. So you can write a custom connector. You can find all of our resources and information at developer.domo.com, which I'm sure you've been hearing so much about. It is a beast of information, and everything you need to know you can find there. Let me tell you about who I am. So my name is Lacey Rogers. I am a software engineer at Domo. I've been working with the same team for the last 6 years, and I love it. It's just the best place to work. I currently reside in southern Utah. My city's called St. George. There's lots of sunshine here. If you're familiar with Zion National Park, that's basically my backyard. So I do a lot of hiking. I'm also half of a band called Red Dirt Girls with my sister. So that's really fun. And it's my birthday tomorrow. I turn 30 tomorrow, and I cannot wait to be 30. And I am celebrating early today with you by talking about my favorite feature in Domo, which is the Connector IDE. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Lacey Bila. That is my handle.
Lacey,
okay.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a hum coming through with your microphone. I don't know, maybe if you sit a little closer to it, maybe that might help a little.
Okay, if I'm sitting closer, can you hear me better now?
It still has a weird hum, but we'll make do.
Okay, so sorry about that. That is not fun.
No worries.
Okay, I am just going to get hands-on and start doing a live demonstration for you all of what the Connector IDE is. So first, let's start at developer.domo.com. This is where you'll find everything. Under Build Your Own Connector, this is where all of our information lives. And in here, we provide a brief description on what the Connector IDE is, what connectors are, how to configure authentication, reports, process data, what the publishing process is like, and then we have some examples. And when you're coding in the Connector IDE, we don't allow for you to import your own libraries. So we've got you covered where we have provided all of these helper methods and classes for you to use to parse your data, to make an HTTP request. It's all there for you. If there is something from a third-party library that you would like to use, we're more than welcome to hear what we're missing and find a way that we can provide that to you just as a feature enhancement.
And on that note, Lacey, sorry, I think Andy was saying that for people who are building custom apps using the IDE, that would be when they would turn to third-party support.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So we have an awesome support team who is really quick to respond. If you are missing something, just reach out to third-party connector help at domo.com. And I believe we have that here as well. That is the email. Oh, also, I just wanted to add that we are compiling this JavaScript. So you're writing your connectors in JavaScript, and we do use the Java 8 Nashorn script engine to compile it, which is only compatible with ES5. So just when you're writing your connectors or your actions, just know that it has to be ES5 compatible. So let's go ahead and just start building. So I have logged into my Domo Dojo instance. Oh, that's been a while, so let's log in again. So this will just prompt you to log into your Domo instance. If you're logging in for the first time, you will have like a little introduction video and some terms of service for you to go over and agree to before we let you in. And then we give you 3 sample connectors just right out the gate. So first we have this example Facebook connector, which will show you how to connect using OAuth authentication. And then we have sample CRM, which is just a basic username and password authentication. And then the USGS earthquake connector requires no auth. And so it is just a super simple example. When you create a new connector, you'll see all the options you have here of what you can create. A data grid connector is just our normal connectors. Write back is what Cameron was talking about earlier, where you can pull data in from a data set within Domo, and then you can write it back out to a third party. Or a Domo action, which is just like he said, a serverless function to be ran from within a Domo app. So today, I just kind of
sorry, Lacey.
Yeah.
Anonymous questioner asks,
Wonderful.
what does it take to get access to the Connector IDE? Like, is there a feature switch or is it just there?
Everyone has access to it.
To api.domo.com.
Yep. You go to developer.domo.com and build now. It'll just prompt you to log in. I believe we're just only restricting participant users, but as long as you have more access than that, you are good to go with the Connector IDE.
And then if I go to click on create new connector, will I always see write back in Domo action?
So these are features that you will have to have enabled for your instance, write back and Domo action.
And do you know off top, are we still talking to our CSM or are we submitting a support ticket?
I believe you're talking to your CSM.
Okay. Sorry for all the interruptions.
No problem. I really appreciate it. You let me know if there's any other questions during the time. So I have already created just a connector from scratch. We're going to build this USGS earthquake connector together. Since it is a public API and it pulls really fascinating earthquake data. So we do require you to provide your own icons. And icons, it's up to you how they want to look, but you can't just put in like a big white square here. We do want them to be distinguishable so we know which API you are actually connecting to. So we have 4 different icons for the different areas that they will be displayed within Domo. And then please provide your name so we know who is writing the connector. And now here's where you configure your authentication. As you can see, all of our different types. When there's no auth, a username and password, when you authenticate with an API key, OAuth 2, or custom. Custom is typically used for cases where it's like OAuth 2, but they also require this additional parameter to be passed along in the request. And so that's when you would use custom. Or maybe it's a username and password and an API key. So that is a scenario where you would have to use custom. For now, we're just going to select none because USGS doesn't require any authentication, but we do want to run something that will let us know that this API is accessible. So we have this little script, and I hope it's okay. I'm just going to be copying and pasting code and then going line by line what we're doing here. So this is the URL to access the USGS information. HTTP request, this is our class that we are providing for you to make all of your GET requests or your POST requests. So we're just going to call out to this URL and make sure we're getting a response. This feature collection is something that will be returned when the response is successful. So if we do see that feature collection there, that tells us that we have authenticated correctly. But really it just means like, hey, you can run, or you can request to this API, it's up and running. So we'll go ahead and run the script and see what happens here. This Domo class is just a class that extends some methods for helping you write your code. So this log method is really useful while you're programming and debugging, just so you can see what your responses are. So you can see this is our result here, and it does have a feature collection. And so we have a successful authentication. So in the case with an API key, you would make your request and then you would just check if that response said successful or not, or you can even check the status code and then just say that authentication is successful. So once we're done with our authentication, now we can decide which reports we actually want to build into this connector. If you have powered up a connector, you should be familiar with what reports are. It's just distinguishes between which data you're going to be pulling for that data set specifically. So for USGS, you're able to get data for either the past hour, you can get data for the past day, we can do the past 7 days, or you can even do pull data from the last specific number of days. If you want to be more custom. And then sometimes connectors, well, actually a lot of the time connectors require more configuration, more parameters to be provided when you're spinning up a data set. So if you need to provide like an employee ID or something, or a month, day, year, then you could enable advanced mode. And this will provide the ability to add a parameter that is either a string, integer, a date selector, text, or dropdown, or discovery. What discovery is it requires you to make a request to the API to pull in like a list that you can then select items from. USGS, luckily, is simple enough, doesn't require any additional parameters, so we're just going to leave these blank for now and move on to the data processing script. Are there any questions so far?
No questions have come in yet, but I'm beside myself with excitement. This is
okay, wonderful, good, I'm glad to hear it. All right, now the data processing block. This is the most important part of your connector. This is how you're going to be getting your data. So first, we're just logging out what report they have selected. You can see our report dropdown right here is now populated with the options that we provided before. And now we're just checking what is the value. Have they selected past hour? If they have, let's trigger our past hour method. What past hour does is then just calls our process records function that we've defined, but passes in the specific URL that is just for the hour. So you can see with all the different reports, we're passing in a different URL. After we have collected the data in our process records function, you can see we're calling the get on that URL. We log out the response. We're just going to parse it. It is a JSON response. And within that JSON, there is an item called features, which has all the data that we want. So once you've got your data, then you have to set up your data grid. And when you set up your data grid, you have to provide the schema of what the data is going to be. So we have a column name and a column type. So you're just going to call data grid. This is another one of our helper methods or helper objects with the method add column. And first you're just going to pass in the name, and then you're going to pass in the type. So we are going to populate it with the place, which is a typed string, time, which is a date time, and the URL, which is also a string. Now we're going to just loop through that data, and each index is essentially one row that we want to see in the data grid. You do have to make sure that you are adding these values in the same order that you set the schema. So first you can see we're adding place, then there's magnitude. We do have this format time just because it has to be in a specific format. So we have provided this format time method, and then we're passing in the time and the URL. Once you've completed the row, you just have to make sure to call data grid end row. That way we know to move on to the next row. So once we've gone through all the items of the earthquake data, you're done. Your data set has completed and populated. So let's just go ahead and run it and see what happens. You can see all of our log statements in our console. And then right down here, we have our data preview of all the rows of data showing the earthquakes in the last hour. We do have this option because essentially you're like, all right, well, I got my data here, but what's it gonna look like once it's in Domo? So while you're programming this out and you just wanna see what you're getting, you do have the ability to create or update a data set right from here. So if you select this checkbox and then run that script again, what we're going to do is create a data set in your Domo instance that will have that data populated for you. And then we just, once it's completed, we just pop open a window that will take you straight to that data set. And here you can see the 6 rows of data that we pulled in. So that's super useful just for testing this out and getting an idea of what it's going to look like in your instance. Okay, so once you have completed your connector and you're feeling good about it, you're getting the data that you want to get, you can submit it for publishing. When you submit for publishing, we do, before we promote it into your instance, we do perform a number of tests on the connector just to make sure that it's performing well and that it passes security. So we check for things like that there's no hard-coded credentials within the code, or you don't have this crazy recursive method that is just going to call itself over and over and get stuck in a loop, and eventually you just run out of memory. So that's what's happening behind the scenes when we're testing the connector. We do ask that you provide sample credentials for us to use while we're testing. If it is an OAuth connector, we do also need a username and password provided with that as well. The visibility means if you would like this connector to only be used within your company's instance. So like we were saying, that you can create a connector for an internal API, that would be the case where you just only want this connector to be for your company. So you would select shared with your company only. Or we have many cases where people have built connectors and they want all of Domo to be able to use it. So you can say public to all companies, and then it is just put into the App Store for all Domo users to power up.
Lacey, 2 questions on that.
Uh-huh.
Regarding the, I guess, connector review process, approximately how long does that take?
It typically takes 1 week. So you should hear back from us within 48 hours if there is an issue with your connector. If not, you should have your connector published within your instance in the next 7 days. So 5 business days though. And it doesn't take too long. And we're pretty good about notifying you as soon as we see a problem with the connector.
And I guess for the...
Sorry, go ahead. When we do reject the connector,
Yeah.
we let you know, and then we also mark the status as rejected, which you will see in your status overview as well. So you can always come back to your connector within the IDE and check the status of the connector here if you're ever curious where it's at in the process.
I remember when I was building my terrible connector, I was actually getting feedback from the team saying, oh, you're using this and this is this, and this API doesn't happen to be as secure or something along those lines. I didn't.
Yeah.
Is it fair to say that after we've gone through this connector review that the connector that we've built is as secure as all of the other Domo connectors?
Absolutely. Yep. And since these connectors, they are running in the same framework as all of Domo's connectors. So yeah, the security is top notch on these connectors. And I will say, once you have submitted the connector for the first time and it's been published, then the turnaround time is a lot quicker because we don't necessarily have to go through all the security that we did before for the initial time. So if you're just like adding a new column to the data set, then it's a really quick fix and we can get that to you just in a couple days.
Awesome. And I have one last question. There's also anonymous attendee. I see your question. I am going to ask it shortly. Just wanted to stay on theme here. Lacey and possibly Cameron, when you're working with partners or people who are developing like a proprietary connector, as it were, have you seen a movement to try to monetize the sharing of this connector across the Domo customer base? And is that supported in any way?
Not currently, but it's definitely something that we want to be working with in the future, because there are many cases where we will have, so in the case when they did submit the connector publicly and now everyone has access to it. And if someone wanted to make a change to it, we have to go back to that original author and ask them to make the change. Our goal is to make it so that someone can just request to make that change themselves, and then still we do want that customer to have approval over it and make sure that they know what's going on with their connector that they created. But to have more of a community aspect is our goal. Absolutely.
That would be phenomenal for some of the connectors that don't get as much love from the Domo developer team, connector team, where somebody's like, oh my God, I really just need this to work and I would love to fix it myself.
Right.
That sounds
exactly.
super intriguing. Okay, so I want to respect your time and the content that you wanted to get covered. Is this a good time to start asking questions, or do you still have a lot more that you want to go through?
My final thing that I just wanted to show was after you submit the connector, then what? What does that look like from here? And this is just a short portion of it. So we'll just do this quickly, and then happy to just answer questions from there on out. So once you've submitted your connector, we basically freeze it for you. So you can't access the code, you can't make any changes. This way you don't have any confusion with, oh, I thought I added this report, but it's not showing up in the connector, and that's because you added it later after you had submitted it. So we lock it down. But if you do think of something that you wanted to add before it was published, you can just view the status and go ahead and withdraw it. Once you've withdrawn the connector, then we unlock it for you. You can make any changes. It does pull it from our queue to be published, but once you submit it again, then it will be back and we'll be working on publishing it again.
Wicked.
I'm just going to change this real quick because I saw we do have the ability to self-publish connectors, but unfortunately it is not compatible with discovery parameters right now. So I'm just going to hurry and switch that up real quick so I can show you what self-publishing looks like. Because like we said, it does take up to 7 days to get these connectors in your instance, but sometimes you just want to get your hands on it right now and start building cards off of it. So we do have the ability to self-publish the connector. So what this does is it's creating a temporary version of your connector and then pushing it into your instance. It will only be available for 30 days. So you have the next 30 days to build data sets off this and create cards on it. We do just warn you, like this is a temporary connector, like don't build anything that you're going to be demoing to your entire company, like off of these data sets. It is just for testing it out and getting an idea. So just if you are building off of these data sets, make sure that it's just super easy to then swap out your data sets with data sets that you will create with the official published version of the connector.
So speaking to that point, when the 30 days are up, I assume that the connector just stops running. The data will still be there in Domo, right?
Yes, your data will still be there. It's just your data set runs. There will be no new successful runs.
Got it.
So it's just stale data after that.
Mm-hmm. And so is it possible to swap a connector that was built off of the trial connector or the self-published connector? Can I swap it to the official connector and keep the same data set ID? Or would I have to like...
No, right now we don't have a way to migrate data sets from self-published to the official. Mm-hmm. We just have to power it up again.
Okay. John, oh, no, let me ask this guy's question. So anonymous attendee asks, how do you write a connector? Like, is it documented? Do you have to look at the documentation at the data source? How do we know what format to process the data into for Domo?
Gotcha, great question. So that is all dependent on the API you are connecting to. Right. So if it is a public API, there should be provided documentation that will tell you how to authenticate, what the format is, what data you can pull, and any other things like if there's rate limiting issues like that. That is all dependent on that API. Yeah. Luckily, if it's a public API, there's usually some pretty good documentation provided.
Yeah, so you can, for example, Google developer Spotify API, and they'll have all of their documentation about what you can pull, how to authenticate, and so on. So that's definitely vendor specific.
Exactly.
I guess thinking on the Domo side, though, like one of the challenges with APIs that we have to deal with as we bring data into Domo is like, how do I deal with multi-value columns or multi-value objects? Like,
yeah, gotcha. So if it's like an object that is a list.
Yeah, exactly.
The response, yeah, and you can, that is all up to you when you're populating your data grid. You just kind of have to be familiar with the response and what it looks like and what parts of it need to be more flattened within the data. We do have a couple different ways for you to parse your data. You can either just use that JSON.parse that was in my example, or you can use our magic parse, which just basically does a first row or first item in the list row. And this is so easy. We have so many people who are using this. They just call the response, pass the response into here, and then they have their data grid. But there are cases where there's an object within an object, and then that's when you have to be more customizable, and it doesn't really work for this method when you do want to be more specific with the data.
Yeah, guys, when you are pulling a data set that has especially like 2 or 3 lists, like set of tweets and set of people mentioned in a tweet, or sorry, set of hashtags and set of people mentioned in the tweet. You want to think through like, how should my data look like if I have 2 sets of lists? Do I do a Cartesian product? Do I add columns? Problem with adding columns is that your data set changes the headers, which means in ETL, your ETLs are going to break. So it's definitely like one of the big gotchas, and kudos to Domo for like the amount of effort you guys do for your 1,000+ connectors. It's mind blowing. Okay,
Yeah.
last question from John Stevens, and then we're going to wrap and go on to the next talk. John asks if a connector built in the IDE is tied to the user or to the instance. Mm-hmm. And I guess by proxy, what happens if a user gets removed from an instance?
Yes, yeah. So that is something that happens quite often. Someone will build a connector, but then they will leave that company. And so now that's kind of an orphaned connector. But what we can always do, we appreciate it when they let us know that they are leaving. They're no longer going to be the owner of that connector. And we can transfer ownership to a new user. So yes, it is tied to a specific user. But we are able to copy them from user to user very easily. There can only be one owner at a time, though. Mm-hmm. So you can't have multiple people own the same connector.
And if I'm a consultant, for example, and I've built a connector for, dang it, I said it was the last question, but this is such a great topic.
No, it's okay.
If I'm a consultant and I built a custom connector, like let's say one day Alexis builds a data set that has the tags, can we take that connector with us into another organization without having to write a new connector through the IDE, and without publishing it to all companies?
I'm sure there would be a way to do that. We haven't had that scenario come up. I think more commonly it would just be make the connector public to everyone. And then that way when I come back to Domo, it's just already there for me.
Yeah, but I'm a consultant. That's my secret sauce.
That's true. That's true.
It's my money.
Okay. And no, there are cases where we have connectors that only 10 customers have access to.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's more word of mouth, like, hey, I know that this exists. Can you enable it for this customer now? So that would be I think you would just submit a request.
Okay. Okay.
A connector to be turned on for.
All right, Jamie, only because you're my favorite TC in EMEA, we're going to get your question in and then we have to change. Is there a best practice for version control of custom connectors?
Okay, so if you publish a new version and then you're like, oh, wait, I want the old version again. That would just have to be done through our third-party connector help, our support team. Mm-hmm. And we are monitoring third-party connectors just as much as we monitor any connector. And so if we do see that, oh, this new version has an issue, everything's failing, we will reach out to you immediately. We can roll back super easily. And yeah, that just follows kind of more the flow of all connectors.
So Domo is storing the history of my code over time.
Yes. We don't. Right now, there's not a way to get that through the Connector IDE's UI. Right. But if you do need an old version of code, we can get that for you.
Got it.